I'm going to talk about college algebra and how I used inquiry-based learning in my class. And as a bonus, I'm teaching this class again this summer, and I'm using a slightly different method, so I'm going to give you a couple different approaches. Okay, so 3 parts. I'm going to talk about how grading works, how presentations work, and how to design assignments and assessments. Okay, so first off, when we're talking about grading, the biggest thing is you need to decide how much of a lot of different things. Okay, so in particular, how much material to cover, how much, when you cover this material, how deeply do you cover it, and then how much do you weigh these things, right? How much is a test worth to you? How much is it going to be worth to the students? If you're like me and you're a low man on the totem pole, you probably don't have a lot of say in what material to cover. These are things that you take into account, and if you're teaching college algebra, you probably are in a situation like me, if I had to guess. One thing that I like to do, I like to weight the presentations equally with the final exam. The presentations sort of give me a real-time sort of feedback on how you are doing, and the final exam is sort of a pull out all the stops, you still have a chance sort of last plea for a passing grade in the class. So I like to have them weighted equally. You might have a different view on that. The rest of the weight, I usually distribute amongst the remaining in-class exams evenly. Okay, so just for example, this is what I did in my class, both in the spring and the summer. 20% of your grade is allotted to homework, quizzes, presentations, attendance, and anything else. What you put in that category is entirely up to you. For me, that's almost always just presentations. However, presentations are generally over the homework problems. So in a lot of ways, that's sort of incorporated into it, as well as attendance, because you can't present if you don't come. That's all part of their grade. And again, depending on the course, maybe it's say it's a linear algebra course or something like that, you might want to put certain projects in there, and you might count them under the same umbrella, especially if you'll have them presented to the class. So for example, my presentations were 20%, my final exam was also 20%, and I had 3 in-class exams, which were 20% apiece. All right, so now, just to talk about the presentations a little bit, the class that I taught in the spring, we had about 60 class days, and they were 50 minutes apiece, and I had roughly 35 students. So this might be an anomaly. You might not have quite so much time in your classes. I believe this was a 4-hour class, so that might be a bit unusual for you. But nonetheless, that's about how much time I had. And in that amount of time, I had 8 homework assignments and roughly 10 days of presentation. Okay, so what does that mean? Some homework assignments sort of take longer to present. In this class in particular, when we got to systems of equations, right, some of those problems just take longer to do, and there's a lot of writing at the board and what have you. Notice that is, in this case, 1/6 of the class was devoted to presentations. Okay, I already knew that I had a 1/6 of my class devoted to that. Again, depending on your students, your style, your preferences, I might take that up to as high as 1/3 again, or even 1/2 in this type of class. And another thing, every time I had a test, it was always presentations the day before. Okay, so why did I do this? Well, part of this goes back to when I was a student, not so long ago. I always hated it when a professor would tell me, okay, this is what's going to be on the test. The test is this many days from now. And then they start talking about a few more things that are going to be on the test after that I don't care about, because I got to worry about this test that's in 2 or 3 days, right? So I really try to avoid that if I can. So a nice thing that I like about having presentations the day before is it's a review session, right? This is the last set of problems before the test, and if you didn't know it by now, then you weren't ready for presentations either, right? So I like to do that, and like I said, it makes me emotionally satisfied that I haven't wasted some class time, basically. Okay. As I said, I'm also teaching this during the summer, and how this works is I have 25 class days, and these are every day, so Monday through Friday for 5 weeks. Okay. These classes are roughly 2 hours apiece. The way it's scheduled, I actually have 2 one-hour classes assigned to me with a 15-minute gap in between, and I have about 20 students in my class. So I do this class a little bit different. Again, because it's a summer course, the time is a bit different. So the first thing I do on the first day is I walk in, I hand out the syllabus, and tell them what's going to go down. Here's how this class is going to go, and it takes me usually half the class just to go over the syllabus, right? But once I do that, I go straight into the first lesson. Okay, what do I mean by the first lesson? Okay, so again, I spend a lot of time making my students do presentations, so I just basically introduce the new material. Okay, so on the first day, that might be, you guys all remember graphs, right? You've been doing those for a while. So we start talking about graphs and maybe linear equations and stuff like that. Well, and then after I've told you what I want you to look into, I give you a few problems to look over. And that's what you're presenting tomorrow. Okay? That's what we do the first half of every class. We have presentations. So after presentations, we have that 15-minute break I talked about. So we come back, and I'm going to tell you all about what you need to know for tomorrow. Okay? So each day, I'm introducing something new, and we're talking about the stuff we talked about last time. So there's sort of this reinforcement of material. It is very difficult to, as Dr. Parker referred to earlier, it's difficult to get this fester time when you have this sort of class, which is why I like to reinforce. We talk about the same subject 2 days in a row, every subject. Okay? Then after the second day, on the third day, we have presentations over the next lesson. And then I talk about the next thing, and so on. Okay? Then eventually, we have presentations. And after that, does anybody have any questions about the test for tomorrow? And if not, see you guys tomorrow. Okay? Then there's the test. And when we come back from the test, we'll go over the test. And then I'm going to get right on going into the next topics. Okay? So an interesting thing about this, I know some people don't like to do this really, this reviewing a test after you gave the test. But if you're writing tests in such a way that it's not a learning experience, oh no, then perhaps you've made a questionable decision, right? So now, how do I grade the presentations? So this seems to be a common theme. Everybody has sort of a simple grading scale for presentations that they stole from TED. So I assign, in this sort of class, like I said, this is, for most people, their first class in college, their first math class in college. So I assign the presentations in this class, if nothing else, just to make sure that everyone gets the same amount of opportunities. Notice I say pseudo-random. Literally, everyone gets the same amount of opportunities. Okay, so how does that work? Basically, I would ask some smart person to pick an integer for me. Then I'll do some sort of modular arithmetic and figure out what that means for who the first person is going to be. Why do I do that? Because they have no idea what I'm doing to figure out who the first person is. Right? Then, after that, let's say there's 14 people in the class. If I go every third person, I'll cover the whole roll that way, right? Because it's 2 mod 3. Again, they don't know what the hell I'm doing, but everyone gets the same number of opportunities to present. Okay? On top of that, after, let's say I only had 10 people in the class and I had 30 problems to do that day, how would we go through that? Well, once everybody's gone through the roll, then I do take volunteers, okay? Because for one, we've sort of already gone through the problems everyone should have done, maybe the first 10, 15 that I asked about, and we've sort of gotten on to the more interesting problems, perhaps. But also, it's sort of a redemption factor, because if you worked all the problems in the homework, except for that one that I asked you to do, you're probably going to be pretty upset with me about that, right? Well now, hey, look, I did all the other problems. You can sort of redeem yourself. I really did have these other problems, and I go back and I adjust your grade accordingly, okay? If there are any sort of ties and who would volunteer for a presentation, the person with the worst grade and the least opportunities is how I determine those sort of tiebreakers. So here goes the grades. A 4 is perfect, okay? Well, as close as I'm going to get to perfect in this class. A 3 is, well, it's good, but it's not a 4, whatever that means, right? And again, these are not necessarily the most emotionally satisfying responses when my students ask me, what is my grade in the class? but this is the best way for me to be honest. Okay, now, 2 is pretty much the worst grade. Now, there's some small print coming, right? 2 is basically the worst grade you're ever going to get if you come and put something on the board. You could do very, very poorly, and you're probably going to get at least that 2. So this is sort of half credit in that situation. So there are exceptions, obviously. You get a 1 if you refuse to present. So I'm going to ask you if you'll go to the board, but I'm not going to physically force you to do so, right? You can always just say no. Now, why do I give them still a point for coming to class and saying that they don't want to do it? Because at least they're there to see someone work the problem, okay? Refusal could be because I didn't know how to do it, but at least you took the time to come to class to figure out how to do it, right? Because these people just didn't come because they didn't do their homework, and they didn't get anything out of it, okay? What's the or worse? Every now and again, you'll get somebody who's figured out this 2 is the worst grade scenario, and they'll just go up there and waste everyone's time. I nip that in the bud as quickly as possible, right? So if it's obvious that someone's just completely misguided, that's okay. But it's also obvious when someone's just trying to pull one over on you, right? They're just trying to get some credit for nothing, okay? So again, I make that very obvious to them if that's what I feel they're doing, okay? So that's basically how the presentations go. Now, when it comes to developing the assessments, again, this depends a lot on what class you're teaching. These sort of methods would work well for any sort of, or again, any appropriate lower level math course where you're not necessarily getting people who are accustomed to this. I can tell you now, one of the biggest problems I run into in my classes is, again, these are mostly freshman level students. When I ask them a question about something they put on the board, they immediately assume that they're wrong. I've done something wrong, because teachers never ask you questions unless you've done something wrong. And again, that is something that they have to get used to very quickly. So one of the things that my students have always told me, if you are working out of a book, or there's a textbook that goes with the course that's been, again, decided by the university, if you're in my position, then they really appreciate it if you don't work the examples that are already in the book. Now, why do I say that? Sometimes you can't avoid it. If you're talking about, say, transformations of functions, you're going to graph y equals x squared as your parent function for all the quadratics, right? But if you're doing, say, partial fraction decomposition, don't do the 2 examples that are in the book, because those are the only 2 other examples they are willing to look for, basically, right? Okay. Similarly, I make an effort to design all my own homework problems for the most part that are not exactly the same problems out of the book. This is for a variety of reasons. Again, this goes back to that depth of knowledge. I can put more emphasis on certain topics in the book. But in a statistics class, for example, if you look at the problems about exponential distributions, if you can work the first one, you can probably work the next 45, because they're all the same, right? So again, when people come up to me, because we have a test coming soon, and they say, I feel like I've been working on all the stuff like I should, but I still need some more stuff. Well, that's that syllabus that the department wrote. Hey, look, there's a list of dozens and dozens of problems for every section that you can work. So they always have extra resources if I do that. Okay? And second, just try to make the students explore the concepts. Again, don't give them 50 problems that if they can work one, they can work them all. What do I mean by that? Just for example, a book problem might be something like, find an equation for the line that would bisect and be perpendicular to some line segment connecting 2 points. Okay, and that's not a bad problem, and it's sort of deep for a book problem, I guess. But I might ask the problem instead, suppose L is a line that has the property where all points on the line are exactly the same from this point as they are from this point. And a lot of people, when they do this, the first thing they'll do is draw a picture, okay? And then they'll come to realize that this is a perpendicular bisector. So they sort of get the same, they get all the things they were going to get from the book problem, but they get a few additional insights and maybe help build their intuition that way. Okay? All right. Well, thanks.
I had a question about the presentation. Does that basically solve a homework problem on a board, or is there more involved to that?
In a college algebra class, it is essentially, here's your homework, you're going to go up to the board and explain how you did that problem. Again, in this class, it's always just homework problems. Like I said, if you were doing maybe a linear algebra class, you might have projects that you ask them to do, but it really depends. In this class, it's exclusively homework.
Yeah, I think similarly, what is the introduction half of your lecture about? Are you actually teaching something?
Like on the very first day, or the second half of the summer courses?
It seems like the second half of your summer was always presentations, and then the second half was introduction to the next day. So that was 1 hour. So what do you do during that time?
Okay, so for example, earlier in the week, we talked about linear equations, and then the next day we did presentations. Then we had our 15-minute break, and then I defined what's a quadratic equation and went on to talk about a few properties that I would like them to tell me more about quadratic equations. So I literally just introduced the new material, define the necessary terms, and get them to come see me when they need help. Yeah.
During the regular semester, you said you had about 1 in 6 was a problem session. Does that mean that they only had homework due 1 in every 6 class periods, or did you have a way to encourage them to do homework daily to keep up?
So generally what I would do is I would write the homework for the next presentations, and that might be 2 or 3 days of classwork. Early in the semester, I try to make it very clear that you can already begin working on this homework. And sort of the way I foreshadow my way through the course, a lot of the clever cats can solve all the homework once we talk about the first thing, because it all sort of builds upon itself. Unfortunately, there will be people who don't come until office hours right before class to ask me how to do what we've done for the past 2 weeks. But all I can do is encourage them not to wait so long next time, right? Typically, in that class, I would have presentations about every week and a half, roughly.